Okay, so our speaker today for our event, a No Holds Barred tour of modern day publishing, is Bennett R. Coles, who joins us with a wide range of experiences within the publishing industry. He's the award-winning author of 6 novels and 2 short stories. He's worked with several New York publishers and is currently with HarperCollins. He's also been an editor for nearly 30 years and spent the last 10 years as the publisher at a small press named Promontory. He's worked extensively with authors in both the traditional and self-publishing world and understands well what a strange place the publishing world can be. So would you please welcome Bennett R. Coles.
All right. Thanks very much, Sean. I'll wave right here so you can see which one of these little tiny screens is me. Thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to join the Chicago Writers Association and to talk about publishing. I'm going to share my screen now with everyone so that you can see my presentation that I have prepared. And I'll just get there we go. So I'm just going to focus on this. If anyone has any questions as we go along, they're highly encouraged. And what I'll do is I will take a couple of breaks every few slides when I get to the end of a subject, and I'll ask for questions then. Also, if you think of a question while I'm talking, feel free to use the chat, and the chat will then pop up and I can see the question and I can either address it right then or I can come back to it in a little bit. But by all means, ask questions throughout the presentation, and there will also be time at the end of the presentation for questions then too. So without further ado, let's dive into a no holds barred tour of modern publishing. What we're going to talk about today, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experiences, just because I want you to understand where I'm coming from and where the breadth and the depth of my knowledge of this industry come from. And then I'm going to go through some definitions, which are common definitions that you will come across in the industry, and perhaps you don't know what they are. So we'll just go through some of those. Then I'm going to spend some time specifically on traditional publishing and the pros and cons, the ins and outs of how it works, and then compare that to self-publishing, same thing, and we'll go through back and forth. And I'd like to say right out of the gate here that it's not my intention to try and convince you that one style of publishing is better than another. They're both good, they both have pros and cons, and we'll wrap things up with a comparison of the two at the very end. So let's talk about where I come from and why it makes sense that I'm talking to you today about the industry. So my name is Ben Coles, and I've been writing since 1985, and I've been editing since 1992. So that right away kind of tells you that I'm not a millennial. I've been around quite a while and have been in this industry for quite a while. In 2010, I took over the helm of a small publishing house called Promontory Press. I actually stepped down from that role just earlier this year. So I did that for 10 years and have had quite enough of it. And I'm focusing more on my own writing and on working directly with authors. I also launched a company called Cascadia Author Services in 2015, which is, as it sounds, is to do with author services. So it's to do specifically with helping authors get ready for publication. As an author, I write science fiction, and I did my first series with Titan Books, which are based out of London, England, and are partnered with Random House here in the US. And my second series is the Winds of Mark series with Harper Voyager. The second book in the series is coming out this fall. It's called Dark Star Rising. I had the unique opportunity to do an interactive novel with a publisher called Choice of Games. I don't know how many of you remember the old choose your own adventure books that a lot of us used to read when we were younger, where you would read part of the story and then you had to make a choice, and then you'd flip to either this page or that page. Well, those books are back, but they're digital now, and it's really cool. And so now you have to make a choice, but you can't go back. If you don't like your choice, you can't flip back. You have to keep going with the story. So that's what an interactive novel is where you, the reader, are actually the hero in the book, and you get to choose how the story goes. Super cool. When I'm not doing writing under my own name, I also do ghost writing. I've done numerous fiction and nonfiction projects for other authors to help them move forward in the publishing industry. Now, as a publisher, I was heading up Promontory Press for 10 years. Promontory began as sort of a cooperative of fellow authors, and we tried out a few publishing models in the early years, but we developed pretty quickly into a traditional publisher. And so being at the helm of Promontory, I really got to see how the industry works, the traditional industry works on the inside, as far as the sales process and the editorial process and why publishers do what they do. And when I talk about traditional publishing in a few minutes, I'll be drawing a lot on my own experience as a publisher in this industry and why why publishers say and act and do the things that they do. I just put it at the bottom here some of the Promontory's more recent titles, just to show that they publish a wide variety of books, but they specialize in books by or about people who serve society. And lastly, my other company, Cascadia Author Services, I actually launched Cascadia out of my experiences at Promontory, because I found that as a small press, we were very limited in the number of titles that we could publish any year, because as a publisher, we take all the financial risk. So we have to be very, very picky. And we had to turn down an awful lot of really good books because we just couldn't do them all. I also discovered that there are some books that are really better geared towards self-publishing. And I'll talk about that later on as to what kind of books are actually better served by self-publishing than traditional. And I realized that there was a huge part of the market that needed to be better served. And so Cascadia was launched not as a self-publisher, but as author services, which can get authors ready for publishing, either whether they want to go traditional or indie. Cascadia gets them ready and then gets out of the way. So I say this just to say that I have worked in the self-publishing industry quite a lot, as well as the traditional publishing industry. And as an author, I actually have done both self and traditional publishing. So all of that just to say that I'm coming at this talk today, both as an author and as an industry pro who has worked in both self and traditional publishing. So that's where I'm coming from. So all that behind us, stop talking about me now. Let's start talking about the industry. There are some definitions that I'd like to go through really quickly, just to help plant us so that we know what we're talking about. Here are, I've got 8 different things I want to talk about. First of all, traditional publishing. It's one of the big topics of today, and I'll break it down in more detail, but really quickly, what traditional publishing is. That is what we tend to think of as book publishing, where the author gets paid by the publisher to hand over their book. They work with an editor. The publishing house does all of the work. They do the editing, the cover design, they do the selling, all the rest. All the author has to do is write and grapple with their editor, and hopefully money flows to the author. This is where all the big bookstores reside, all the big publishers, the big distribution systems. The book industry as we have known it for over 100 years, that is traditional publishing. Self-publishing is a much more recent development, and self-publishing in its current form has existed for between 10 to 15 years, depending on how you define when it started. It effectively removes the publishers and the distributors and the bookstores from the fray, and it focuses on the author using their own money to hire professionals to help them with editing, cover design, and all those things, to put together their book themselves and then sell the book either directly or on an online service like Amazon. So in effect, traditional publishing is the whole big traditional industry. Self-publishing is completely focused on the author, and they just hire people to help them. Author services is very similar to self-publishing, but it's different in that author services is very DIY, do it yourself. This is where the author really takes control, and they only hire the people that they need. Self-publishing is a little different in that you, as the author, will work with a company that will actually do the publishing for you. And 10 years ago, authors really needed that because there was no way for authors to actually get their book to market on their own. They needed some kind of intermediary to do that for them. And that's where most of the self-publishing companies that we know today came from. They had this access to at least the online market that authors couldn't get. And so they built their business around that. Nowadays, though, the access to distribution has improved and authors can do it themselves. And so author services is sort of a step down from self-publishing, where the author is truly in control, whereas self-publishing, they're still beholden to a company that is going to help them get into the market. Hybrid publishing is somewhere in between. It's a bit of a loose term that you will hear floating around in the industry quite a lot, particularly as an author looking at different ways to publish. You will come across hybrid publishers. There is no clear definition of what a hybrid publisher is, but they are somewhere in between a traditional publisher and a self-publisher. It can go anywhere from it's a self-publisher who just realizes they have a bad reputation and so they've renamed themselves a hybrid publisher, to a traditional publisher that is going to do all the things that they normally do, but they ask the author to make some kind of financial commitment to their book to help offset the publisher's costs. And everywhere in between is where you can find a publishing house who calls themselves hybrid. But generally it means that the author is giving some kind of financial commitment, but the publisher does have access to the traditional sales channels. And that's really how you define a hybrid publisher. Sort of linked to that, you'll hear terms like partner publishing or assisted publishing. These are other terms that are thrown around to try and define those publishing companies that are somewhere in the middle between a full-on self-publisher and a full-on traditional publisher. It's hard to define exactly what they are, and I encourage any one of you, if you're talking to a company that calls themselves a hybrid publisher, a partner publisher, an assistant publisher, ask really good questions. And I hope after the end of today's discussion, you'll know what good questions to ask as to how close to self-publishing are they, how close to traditional publishing. There are some legitimate companies out there who call themselves hybrid, partner, or assisted publishing who do offer good value. So I'm not saying that they're all charlatans. They're not. Some of them are really very good at what they do, and they've just chosen that business model. But there are also some sharks out there, so you have to be careful. The term vanity press is an interesting one. A vanity press, in fact, is the alternative to traditional publishing that used to exist before self-publishing happened. Vanity press was back in the old days, before a bunch of new technologies that I'll talk about in a minute came along, where if you weren't picked up by a traditional publisher, the only thing you could do was to go and get all your books printed on your own, design your own cover, and launch your book. And these vanity presses would promise you access to the markets, but they couldn't deliver. And they weren't really publishers at all. What they would really do, they would just produce your book and give you 1,000 copies to sit in your basement or your garage. And they earned the name vanity press because people basically just did it for their own vanity. They wanted to say they were a published author. They wanted to have a book, but they had no access to the markets. They couldn't sell anything. Those companies in that form really don't exist anymore. They've been superseded by self-publishing. But you will still hear the term vanity press thrown around, mostly as an insult. It's from people who are more on the traditional side, who don't believe that self-publishing has any legitimacy, and so they'll just call anybody who's not a traditional press, they'll just call them a vanity press. It's kind of basically just a slur, but you will hear it a lot. So the actual definition goes back to companies from 20, 25 years ago who genuinely were not a good deal. They don't exist anymore, but the term is carried on as an insult, basically for self-publishing, hybrid publishing, partner publishing, assisted publishing. People who don't believe in that will just call them vanity presses. So that's what that is. Now, printing. You may wonder, why do I want to specifically talk about printing? Printing is important because when it comes to self-publishing, printing is the single biggest cost that you will have. And in the old days, even at the beginning of self-publishing days, the only way to print books was to use what was the offset printing, which is the old traditional way of printing with big machines, big printing presses. And in order to make the books cost effective, you had to print at least 1,000 copies to bring the cost per unit down enough that you could actually sell them for a profit. And that's offset printing. And it still exists, and lots of companies still use it. The big publishers still use offset printing because for higher quantities of books printed, 1,000, 2,000, so on, it is still the most cost-effective way. But for self-publishing, you don't want to print 1,000 copies when you first start. You want to print maybe 50 and see how it goes. Well, digital printing is a technology that arose about 15 years ago, which has revolutionized printing. Now you can print very small runs of books for a very small cost. And the difference is that offset printing, a lot of the costs come from all the setup fees at the beginning. And those fees are the same no matter how many copies you print, whether you print 1 copy or 1,000. So that's why you have to print so many copies, is to get those setup fees down per unit to make it effective. Digital printing does not have those setup fees. It's just a cost per unit. And the per unit cost of digital versus offset is a little different. Digital is a little more expensive, but if you only want to print 50 copies, you can print 50 copies for, say, $5 a book, as opposed to offset, where it would cost you about $200 a book to print 50 copies. So for self-publishing, and even for those of us in the traditional industry who run small presses, digital printing is a godsend because it means we can just do a short print run just for a single event or just to top up our inventory. We don't need to print 1,000 copies and risk having 900 of those copies sitting around unable to be sold. So digital printing and offset printing are really important. And as an author, you are well served to know the difference. And digital printing is your friend. Print on demand is a form of digital printing, which you will also hear a lot about in the industry, POD. And print on demand is digital printing in the extreme. What it is it's printing 1 book at a time. And if you list your book on Amazon, you may have no inventory in stock, but you list your book on Amazon, someone orders your book on Amazon, the print copy, Amazon or Ingram or one of the other companies that does this will then print 1 copy of your book to fulfill that order, and will send it off to the customer. So again, it costs a little bit more per book to do print on demand, but it's very effective, and then it reduces completely the risk you carry of having to print a whole bunch of copies and have them sitting around, to have to store them, to have to ship them, etc. It's a very nice technology. But I want to clarify here, print on demand is a printing technique. It is not a publishing technique. And I've heard this question being asked if someone's talking to, say, a hybrid publisher or a self-publisher, and they'll even say, are you a print on demand publisher? And that's a difficult question to answer, because even as a traditional publisher, Promontory would use print on demand because it's a great technology. It has nothing to do with what the publishing technique is. Print on demand is just an ability. It's a technology that you can use as a publisher. HarperCollins uses print on demand because if they don't want to carry the inventory, it's easier just to have Amazon or Ingram print that single copy and send it off. So print on demand is something that I really want to clarify. It's not anything to do with what kind of publisher you're talking to. It's just a technology that exists, and it's a really good one, and it's used by both traditional and self-publishing. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick pause here. Are there any questions on any of these definitions, these ones and the ones before? Any questions at this point? And if you are going to ask a question, don't be afraid to unmute yourself as well, so I can hear you.
I have a quick question. Hi, I'm Casey. I'm a
Hi, Casey.
member of CWA. It's been a couple of years now. I really enjoy everybody, and thank you, Ben, for hosting this webinar for us. My question pertains to print on demand. If they're just printing 1 book at a time, what's the quality assurance around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. if you are printing in North America, the quality is generally pretty good because it's done by one of the big companies, either Amazon or Ingram. There have been problems in the past of the quality not being as good. Most of those cases come from when Amazon or Ingram are using one of their partner printers, say in Eastern Europe or in Asia, and then the print quality is not good. Sometimes I have heard of the books, they show up looking okay, but after only a couple of reads, they start to fall apart. I don't hear about it very often. And I think in general, you can rest assured that print on demand, the quality is good. I think because there are enough companies that do it now, like any other industry, you know, your reputation precedes you. And if you get a reputation for doing bad print on demand, then people aren't going to use you. They're going to use your alternative. So in general, yes, the quality is good. Digital versus offset printing, you really can't tell the difference. If you can't tell which method has been used to print a book. When we first used digital printing at Promontory, I actually did a short digital run, and then I held up the book right next to a offset printing copy of it. And when I actually held them side by side, I could see that the offset printing was slightly richer and more nuanced in its color on the cover. But otherwise, really, I couldn't tell the difference. So in general, the quality is acceptable.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, any other questions just on the definitions? Okay, great. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about traditional publishing. So I'm gonna unpackage this whole topic now on traditional publishing. We'll come to self-publishing afterwards, but for now, let's talk about traditional publishing. So traditional publishing is the way that's been around for a long time, and it is still considered by some to be the best method to publish. This is a debate that can can go for a long time over a coffee or a glass of wine, but there definitely are still some corners of the industry that consider traditional publishing to be the best method. In summary, this is what traditional publishing covers. The author usually gets paid in advance. So as the author, you won't be paying the publisher, they will be paying you. This advance may be big, it may be small. As a first-time author, you'll probably get a small advance because you are not a proven quantity yet. $5,000 to $10,000 per book is pretty normal for an advance. So not big money, but you know, hey, it's nice. The publisher is carrying all of the financial risk. So all of the costs for the editing, for the cover design, for the printing, for the shipping, for the warehousing, for the sales team, for the marketing, all of those things the publisher is paying for. And this is the single biggest reason why it is really hard to get published traditionally. Because the publisher is carrying all the financial risk, they have to be very careful in which book they accept. It can't just be a book that they like. You know, you may have written a good book and they think, oh, this is a really well-written book. It also has to be a book they think they can sell. So for example, if your book is about a really hot topic, you know, that everybody's buying these days, great. That fills that box for them. They're going to go with it if the book is well written. But if you were writing about a topic that really nobody's buying these days, the publisher may say, yeah, I mean, it is a really good book, but I don't think we can sell this. An example that I saw come into Promontory a few years ago was a book by an established author who already had a readership. He wrote historical novels. He had written a sequel to Huckleberry Finn. And it was when Huck Finn is an older man, and the story that goes on from there. And, you know, it was an accomplished author, had a following, although this was a bit of a switch for him. He didn't normally write about that bit of history. But it was a book about Huck Finn, who, of course, is an American literary icon. And in the end, I passed on that book because I thought, I just don't think that we, as a publisher, have the ability to support this book. I don't think that we can give this book what it needs. And I'm also not sure how it's going to be received by the American public. So it was a well-written book, but there were other considerations that I had to think about. I'm not sure, because no matter how we sell this book, the financial risk is the same to us. And do I think that we're going to make back enough money to pay for this? I don't know. And so that's just an example of one that I actually passed on, not because of the quality of the writing, not even because of the reputation of the author, because of the topic he was writing about. So that's just an example. And this is something that is also to your benefit in traditional publishing, is that the publisher knows the industry very well. The publisher spends all their time there. This is the world they live in. They know what's hot right now. They know what is selling. They know what year after year after year, this kind of book will sell well. And so they have that knowledge that you as the author probably don't, is to know how the industry works, who's looking for what, what is Barnes and Noble prioritizing right now. They keep their finger on the pulse of the industry. And so they bring real expert knowledge that as an author, you probably don't have, and that will serve you well. So if you do get picked up by a traditional publisher, then you've got a whole team behind you that really know what they're doing. So it does sound really good, traditional publishing. The problem is, it is very hard to get in. And this is the single biggest problem for authors, is just getting into traditional publishing. Once you are in, it does get easier because now you're sort of in that club, but just breaking in the first time can be very difficult. Oh, I just see I've got a chat coming up here. So Robin is asking, how can authors know what's selling? In other words, how can authors also know the pulse of the industry? That is a great question, Robin. And the short answer is you can't. It's really just kind of guesswork. What you can do is look at the bestsellers. Just go to Amazon and look at whatever genre you're interested in writing in, and look at what kind of books are selling best there. That'll give you an idea. Like, for example, I'm sure we all remember when zombies were the craze and everything was about zombies. And if you wrote a book about zombies, you were in. That's one. When Twilight came out, everything was supposed to be about these sort of post-apocalyptic, young adult, stories. And we had a whole ton of them come out around that time. That is the best guess that you can take, is based on what's selling right now. And here's the problem with traditional publishing, which I'll come back to later with self-publishing. The problem with traditional publishing, though, is that nothing happens fast. And I'll explain why in the next slide. Nothing happens fast. So whatever is hot right now may not be hot 2 years from now. And that is a risk, which you as the author are taking, and frankly, the publishers are taking too, because they don't know what's going to be hot 2 years from now. My advice to you, Robin, is write what you want to write. I know that sounds cliched, but it's true. If you try to write to the market, then you may not produce your best work because you feel like you have to shoehorn your writing into a certain style. Write what you think is the best. Write what you want to write, because then your writing quality will shine through. And then it's just a matter of hoping that what you're writing is something that the publishers are looking for. That is my most honest advice to you as far as answering that question. This slide kind of explains why. Because getting into, sorry, another chatter. Yeah, you're welcome, Robin. Getting into the gates is very difficult. If you want to publish with one of the big 5 publishers in New York, like Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, and the others, then you cannot just send your manuscript unsolicited to them. Not anymore. They used to have something called a slush pile, where they would take all the unsolicited manuscripts. But these days, the publishers are so busy. They're so harried. They've cut back their staff. They don't have as many people. They just don't have time. And so if you want to pitch to the big publishers, you will need an agent. And then pitching to an agent is basically the same process. You still have to send in a query letter. You have to send in a synopsis. You have to send in a sample of your writing. It's almost the same as pitching a publisher, as pitching an agent. Agents, I know often authors will think of agents as being adversarial, because if you've ever gone to a writing conference and you've had a chance to pitch to agents, it's probably a little nerve-wracking. some of the agents are really arrogant, and you may feel like agents are not your friend. Well, let me reassure you that agents are your friend. In this industry, you want an agent, and when you sign an agent, they are your best friend because they are working for you. Agents only get paid a percentage of what you get paid. So it's in their best interests to get you as much money as possible because then they get paid. But agents, while the barrier may be a little lower than pitching a publisher is to pitching an agent, because an agent can then pitch multiple publishers, agents these days are far less likely to take a chance on a book that is well written but is like nothing they've ever seen before. Agents are also very busy. They need to make money. They need to make sales. And so they will be more likely to sign a book that is well written, that they can already see a solid market for. As soon as they read your book, they'll go, oh yeah, I totally know which editor at which publishing house would want a book like this. And that's what they're looking for. Yes, they're looking for quality. Like that's a given in traditional publishing. Everybody is looking for quality, but they're also looking for sellability. And so it's just a challenge. And I encourage you all, write what you want to write, because then it'll shine through, and then the quality of your writing will come through because you are really invested in the book that you are writing. And it's just a matter of time. There will be a publisher and there will be an agent who agree that your book is what they're looking for. It just takes time. Now, if you're going to pitch to small presses, you can do it directly. You don't need to have an agent to submit to a small press. So that can take away one barrier from you. Keep in mind, those small presses, while it's easier to get in the door to talk to them, it can actually be harder to get accepted by them because they will produce fewer books a year. The big five publishers produce thousands of books a year. Agents can easily handle hundreds of clients. Small presses will publish anywhere from 2 to 50 books a year. And yes, it can literally be as small as two books a year. So your book better be exactly what they're looking for to get in with some small presses. So this is just the challenge that you have to get into the industry. And it is the biggest challenge for an author and the traditional publishing industry, is just getting in. And keep in mind, and this sucks, but it's true, the entire process of submissions is very subjective. It comes down to the personal opinion of the agent or the editor who is looking at your book. And the advice I can give you there is just don't take it personally. If you get a rejection, that's okay. It doesn't mean your writing is bad. It just means it wasn't what they were looking for. And that was one of the worst things I had to do as the publisher at Promontory, was send the rejection letters. And I always tried to give some advice as to, either the book just was great, but it isn't what we're looking for, and maybe recommend someone else they could submit it to. Or if the book wasn't quite up to standard, I would try and give them some advice on how to improve the book and then resubmit somewhere else later on. Most rejection letters that you get will not tell you much. They'll just say, thank you for submitting. This is not what we're looking for. It doesn't fit our needs. Best wishes. If you as an author do ever get some feedback from an agent or from an editor telling you how you might improve the book, pay attention to that, because that is not meant as an insult. That is meant as a compliment, because your book has obviously impressed them enough. Like they have seen quality here, that it's worth their time to give you that little bit of extra advice. If they didn't like your book at all, they just send you the standard form. If they actually say to you, I would recommend you consider this, changing this in your book, that is really good advice. And you don't have to take it, of course, it is subjective, but I highly recommend you at least consider what that agent or editor told you, and that might be the key to unlocking your book. You generally cannot resubmit unless the agent or the editor tells you specifically, if you can make these changes, please resubmit, then by all means do. But if they tell you no, then the answer is no. You have to move on down your list to the next agent or editor and submit to them. It can often just be a numbers game. It's just a matter of finding the right fit for your book. The right agent or the right editor who sees what you see and says, yeah, this book is something that's going to go all the way. And it is subjective and it does take time. So the single biggest bit of disappointment that authors can feel is this part, is the submissions and the rejection slips. And just take heart, keep working at it. You will eventually find your way through. Now, once your book has been accepted, you may think, oh, great, that's awesome. My book's been accepted. I'm now with a traditional publishing house. My book is going to be on store shelves everywhere. Well, not so fast. Let me talk to you now about the traditional sales process. This is the part that most authors never hear about. And the submission stuff, yeah, authors know all about that. This, though, is sort of behind the curtain, how the traditional industry works. And I have lived this for 10 years, so I know what I'm talking about. This part of the process helps to explain why it takes so long for a book to go from you signing with your publisher to you seeing your book on store shelves. It takes at least 2 years for a book to go through that process. If you were to sign today, then it would be probably 2023 before your book actually hit store shelves. And the big reason is not because it takes editing a long time and not because design takes a long time, it's the sales process. That takes a long time. The sales process is broken down by launch date, and the bookstores, the big bookstores like Barnes & Noble, they need to be pitched 4 months in advance. So if you're launching in July, then walk that back. June, May, April, March, probably February is when your book is being pitched to Barnes & Noble. So your book at that point not only has to be finished with a cover, it also needs to have advanced reviews. It needs to have other authors who have said how great your book is. It needs to have a couple of, maybe Publishers Weekly has chimed in and said what a great book it is. To get those reviews, walk it back another 3 months, because you need to have a book that is finished and bound with a cover that you can then send out to these people to review, and you need to give them time to be able to find the time to read it. So now we're 7 months before launch. Well, in order to have the book ready to send out to reviewers, you need to have the cover design finished, you need to have all the editing done, so that walks it back a few more months. So you can see how this process just gets stretched out. And all of this work goes into one shot. Your book has one shot at the market. In other words, your publisher will pitch your book once. It will not come back and do it again. So they want to make sure they do it right, which is why they do all this work with reviews and everything beforehand. And your publisher is not talking directly to the sales rep at Barnes & Noble or any of the national buyers for bookstores. No, there's another element here called distributors. And if you are a very large distributor like Random House, then you have your own distribution network. But most publishers have to work through distributors. And that's just because there are so many publishers, the bookstore buyers don't want to talk to them all. So they force you to work through a distributor. So the publisher, once they've got your book put together, they're not actually pitching the bookstores, they're pitching the distributor sales team. And so I remember as a publisher, twice a year, we would gather our books and we would get on the phone with our distributor sales team, and we would pitch them and say, okay, these are our top books. These are our top 3, and then these are our other books that, this is what's so great about them. Now, the distributor, remember, probably represents 100 different publishers. And so they're getting these pitches. They can't possibly pitch all of those books to the bookstores. So the distributor will then decide, yeah, okay, I'll take 1 book from that list. I'll take 1 book from that list, maybe 2 from that list that I think are really good. And then they will pitch to the bookstores. So your book may not even get pitched to the bookstore. If the distributor doesn't think that it is important enough based on all the other books that they have to pitch, your book may not even get pitched to the bookstore buyer. And then the bookstore buyer is not going to buy every book that's pitched to them because they're busy. They only have so much money. They want to pick the winner like everybody else does. And so again, the process is subjective, but every sales pro along here has to make their own choice. So your book, hopefully, if it does well through this process, will wind up on bookstore shelves, but it may not. And if it isn't, then it's just on the backlist and it's kind of done because you've only got one shot. If your book does make it onto shelves, then the bookstores will give it between 30 and 90 days to prove that it can sell well. If it is not selling well enough, then those books will be returned to the distributor. Returns, they are the bane of every publisher's existence. What they mean is, let's say Barnes & Noble has told us before book launch, okay, we like this book, we're going to order 1,000 copies of it. Great. We now have to print 1,000 copies of that book to meet that order. The book will go out, Barnes & Noble will have it on the store shelves for a few months, and then, okay, yeah, it's sold all right, but we don't want it anymore. So we're gonna return 500 of those 1,000 to you. So now we as a publisher have 500 copies of this book that we've had to pay to print sitting in our distributor's warehouse, which we really can't sell because we've already pitched that book. We can't pitch it again. And so returns are just an awful reality. And it's another reason why publishers get really stressed about the financial commitment, because they know that a sale is never really a sale in this industry. So that's how the traditional sales process works. That is why publishers are so risk averse and why it can be very hard for you as an author to break in, because if you are not already a well-established name with a well-established brand, they're taking a big risk in taking your book. Your book may be brilliant, right? And every book that is seriously considered in the traditional industry is probably brilliant. That's the basic entry point. Your book has to be really good. But then there's that extra risk that the publisher is carrying. And that is why it is so hard to break in, because of the financial risk the publisher is taking. And they're basically just playing a numbers game. If they publish, 50 books this year, they're hoping that 2 or 3 of them will actually sell well. And those 2 or 3 will pay for all of the others. And that's kind of how traditional selling works. And I'll be the first to tell you, it is the stupidest business model ever. But that's the way it's always been. That's the way it's been. And I have certainly spoken to old publishers, and the attitude is basically, that's the way my daddy did it, it's the way my granddaddy did it, worked for them, works for me. And it's very hard to change. The bookstores don't want to change, they love it. So it makes it difficult. How to help your book sell comes down to marketing. And here is something that all of you need to understand if you're thinking of going traditional. You as the author will be expected to do a lot of marketing these days. This is not always the case, or it wasn't in the past rather. 20 years ago, authors never did marketing, never had to. I remember sitting on a panel about 8 years ago with some other traditionally published authors who had been traditionally published for years. And they were like, yeah, my publisher's asking me to do marketing now, and I have to use this interweb, and I don't know what I'm doing. It's a new thing. But because of the rise of the internet and online selling, publishers really don't know how to do marketing directly to the public. And so they're asking the authors to do it. So if you are looking to go traditional publishing, thinking that all you have to do is write and that the publisher will take care of everything else, just be aware. They will be asking you, what is your marketing platform? Do you have a website? What social media do you do? How active are you? How big a following do you have? These are going to be questions that they ask. So, I see a question coming in. Let's see, from Debbie. What issues exist for a US author to use a Canadian publisher, if any? Generally, there are no issues. As a Canadian publisher, we are hooked into the same distribution system as a US publisher. So, I mean, it's a question to ask. Just make sure that if you're talking to a Canadian publisher, just make sure they do have US distribution, because there are some of them that don't. If they're really small and really Canadian exclusive, they may just focus on the Canadian market. But there's no issue. There's no reason why they can't. Promontory was Canadian small press, and we had a US distributor, and we had full access to the US market. So in general, no, there is no issue. Question from Jonathan. Is the marketing mostly going to be social media and online based, or will it be things like doing readings, in-person work nationwide as well? It will generally be online based, just because that is the cheapest way to reach the most people. Certainly as an author, you are very welcome to do readings and in-person work, but no publisher is going to pay to send you on a tour around America. It costs too much, and it frankly doesn't sell that many books. I've done a lot of readings. I've done a lot of in-store appearances, even in places where I am well known. And if you sell 6 or 7 books at a book signing, that's considered a success. Certainly you will get others. I think 45 might be my record. And at Promontory, I think our record was 122. I remember because it was significant. And we will always encourage authors to do a reading or an in-person work in their local hometown, like where they have a collection of fans. But in general, no. Most of your work to reach the wider audience is going to be online based. So as an author, I highly recommend that you make yourself online savvy, social media savvy, have a website. And it's hard work, don't be wrong. It's hard work for the publishers too, which is why they often push it down with the author, because they don't know what to do either. But it is definitely a piece of this puzzle for the traditional sales process. So yeah, no, it's a good question. We'll talk about that a little bit more in self-publishing as well. So in general, to wrap up on traditional publishing, it is an industry that's in trouble. It has been struggling for the last 15 years. The rise of online selling, which is primarily Amazon, and the rise of ebooks were two really big things that hurt traditional publishing. Because in the old days, there was only one way to buy books, and that was to go into a bookstore. And the only people who had access to those bookstores as far as putting product there were the publishers. So they had a complete lock on the supply chain and on the way to present the product to the public. Online selling and ebooks shattered that. And it took this industry a long time to figure that out. I know 7, 8, 9 years ago, there were still publishers who weren't doing ebooks because they thought it was a fad and they just weren't going to get fussed with that. There were huge fights between publishers and authors when publishers started producing ebook versions of old, good selling titles. And the author said, hang on a sec, I never gave you ebook rights. And it's true, they hadn't, because ebooks hadn't existed. And the publishers just assumed, oh, well, we can just do this. And the general consensus was, no, you can't. And so there are a bunch of authors, from the 80s and 90s and before, who actually self-published the ebook version of their best-selling trade book. And there are others who signed a new contract and got paid more money to give the publisher the right to sell the ebook. But internet selling and ebooks have really challenged the traditional publishing industry's complete monopoly on books. And then when we had the recession in 2008, that just kicked them down even harder. And ever since then, they have been struggling. And they're, starting to pick themselves up again. They're learning slowly, but it is an industry that does not like change. So they have been struggling for most of the time that I've been in it. And because I only became a publisher in 2010, I came in with an outside perspective and I could see a lot of the lunacy of these policies, but who was I? I was just a small press. I can't change the way Barnes & Noble does their thing. So you work with the industry as best you can. Marketing, I talked about a little bit on the last slide. It has become more dynamic, and nowadays you have to market to the general public, whereas in the old days, all you had to do was convince the bookstores to put your book on the shelf, and then the readers would come into the bookstore, and that's the only way you had to advertise, was have a good cover and maybe get some prime shelf space. That's all you had to do. Now with online selling, you have to be much more dynamic. Publishers have really struggled to keep up, and they are putting a lot more pressure on authors to carry some of this burden. And finally, because they've been squeezed by all of these factors, publishers have less patience than they used to let a book series grow. It used to be that if you'd sign an author who was a good writer, who didn't have a following, but you would give them time. You would put out the first book, put out the second book, even put out the third book, and just let that audience grow as the quality of the book was discovered, more and more people found it. And then you would have a lot of authors who are not bestsellers, but they were steady performers. And you'd always find one or two copies of their book on any typical bookstore shelf. And, the authors weren't rich, but they were making an honest living writing books that enough people liked. That does not exist in the same way anymore. Nowadays, publishers, because they're desperate to make the money, if a book series is not really selling well, then they're not going to keep going with it. They just don't have the patience to let a series grow over, 10, 12 years into a steady seller. If they don't see quick results on the first or second book, they're just going to stop and move on to the next one. So this is a change in the industry, which is not good for authors, but it's just the way it is. So all of this comes down to the industry being in trouble. So any questions on the traditional publishing industry? I'm sorry if I sound really negative here, and I don't mean to. It is still a great way to publish books. It's just, it's not the smiley, happy place you might think it is. Publishers are under a lot of pressure, and this is why, for the reasons that I've laid out. I'm not saying don't do it, but just go in with your eyes open. So any questions on the traditional publishing industry before I go on to self-publishing?
I have a question, Bill. Ben, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question is, with this proliferation of small publishers, sometimes people call them boutique presses, has that filled some of this void that the standard 5 big publishers have left? It seems like I just have there's this explosion of small presses. Does that help to? Can we take some hope in that?
Yes, you can, because small presses usually will focus on a particular niche, a particular style of book that they're just going to make their own. And so if you were writing that style of book, then you have a real champion in that small press. Certainly, it can keep the diversity of publishing going. Not to say that the big 5 publishers can't be diverse, because the big 5 themselves own many, many imprints, which are each specialized. As a small press, it can be hard to break in and be taken seriously, but you can rest assured as an author that a small press is working really hard, because they don't have 1,000 books a year to hope for that one gem. They have 20 books a year. They're going to work really hard on all 20 of them. So yeah, I think so. Obviously, I'm a fan of small presses, but they don't have as much power as a big press does, but they'll also give you, the author, more attention. So yeah, I would say it is definitely a good thing. I got a question from John here. Says, can you talk about trying to get a review in a major newspaper? Reviewers won't review self-published authors, and now with so few reviewers, the only books they review come from established authors. Maybe, yeah, okay. Authors from small publishers rarely get reviewed. The new cottage industry of websites, and if they help. Yeah. In general, yeah, as an author, I would not suggest you try and get a review in a major newspaper for the reasons that you say, John. There's so few of them, and they're so locked in with the big publishers that they're not going to waste time with a review on an unknown author when J.K. Rowling is available for an interview. So I wouldn't even really try. There are smaller publications, though, that you can go for. Local newspapers are much more willing to talk to authors. And as far as you're concerned, having an interview in your local newspaper is just as valuable, because you can then take that interview and you can put it online, and you can put it on steroids as far as its reach goes, because now you now have this interview from a legitimate source. There are a lot of review companies out there. I know the City Book Review is one that we use. Chanticleer Book Reviews is another one that I'm very familiar with. And you do have to pay for those reviews, but they are legitimate. And those companies have worked for years to make themselves legitimate. Kirkus is actually the biggest one of all, which you as an author have to pay for. But they have worked really hard on their reputations, so that even though you are paying, everyone who reads the review knows that it is an honest review. You didn't just pay for a 5-star review, you paid for an honest review. So small review sites on like small review websites, yep, they are very good. Anything online is generally better these days because it stays there forever. Even if you were to get an article in the New York Times, it goes out that day with the Times, but then tomorrow it's gone, right? Yeah, yes, you have the prestige of that, but then you yourself are gonna have to do the work to get that thing online and get it out. If you get reviewed by a website, they're gonna do that work for you because they want to get it out to all of their followers. Reviews are very valuable. I highly recommend that all of you look to get as many reviews as you can. And this is one of the things that your publisher will help you with to a degree, but you can also do as well. And you can just tell your publisher, I'm going for these people, they're going to go for them. And the more you can get, the better it is. Most people, if they're reading like on your website, they see a review, they don't pay too much attention to who the reviewer was. They just are reading what the reviewer said. There are a few publications which have name awareness, like obviously, you know, the New York Times, yeah, that carries some weight, but most publications, people just skip right past. Let's see, a question from Haley here. Are you saying that even after getting an agent, the chances of actually getting into a store is not guaranteed? Yes, Haley, I'm sorry. That is exactly what I'm saying. Getting an agent is just the first step. The agent then has to sell your book to the publisher, which is not a guarantee. And if the agent does that and the publisher accepts you, you are now guaranteed that your book will be traditionally published, which is great. But will it actually be on bookstore shelves? No, unfortunately, it's not guaranteed. There are just too many steps that the book has to go through and too many people that need to be convinced that this is the book that's going to make everybody millionaires. So there's no guarantee. I'm not saying it's impossible. It certainly is likely, but it's not guaranteed. Your question also about choosing an agent. What's the most important criteria in an agent? Past sales or passion for your project? I would say, I mean, they're both important, but I would say passion for your project. The most important criterion in choosing an agent is that your agent deals with your kind of book. Like I write science fiction, so I'm going to only pitch my book to an agent who deals with science fiction. Otherwise, I'm just wasting my time and theirs. And it can even be really more specific than that. If you write in a big genre, like say romance, then your agent needs to do more than just, you know, cover romance. It needs to be your kind of romance. Like if you write Western romance, okay, look for an agent who deals with Western romance because that's what you want. You want your agent to believe in your book. So passion for your project is the most important thing. Past sales, of course, are important, but ultimately the agent is on your side because they only get paid if you get paid. So the passion is what's most important. Robert's got a question. 3 book reviewers, Kirkus, Chanticleer, and City Book Reviews. They own like the Manhattan Book Review, the Portland Book Review, the San Francisco Book Review, I think Tucson. They all come together under City Book Reviews. We've used them many times. They're quite good. They have a kids one as well, in case anyone writes kids books. Right. Okay, well, thanks, everyone. If you think of any more questions on traditional publishing, by all means, ask them later. We'll have time at the end. Let's move on to self-publishing now and talk about this very controversial topic. So self-publishing in its current form has been around 10 to 15 years, and it is built primarily on a few technologies. One is online selling, the other is ebooks, and the third is digital printing. Those 3 things revolutionized the way books can be made and sold. And as I said earlier, it broke the monopoly that the traditional publishers had. Once those 3 things existed, authors had a legitimate path to selling their books to the public. So it started about 15 years ago, and I'll be the first to admit, it didn't always take the right path. There were a lot of scam artists in the early days, and the whole way that self-publishing was approached from a sales technique, I think, was fundamentally flawed. The early self-publishers were basically selling the dream of publishing your book. And nobody really understood that this did not mean publishing in the traditional sense at all. There were no curators to make sure that the book was actually quality. There was no requirement to get editing done. All they would do, they would take whatever you wanted to pay for, and then they would slap it together and make it available online. And unfortunately, self-publishing developed an early reputation for producing junk. And the early idea was that, oh, you only self-published if you weren't good enough to traditionally publish. And there were some reasons why it was legitimate to think that in the early days. A lot has changed, though. I want to be really quick to say that. That is not the case anymore. But self-publishing does still bring with it a few challenges. The first one is that there is no established standard, and there's no quality control. You as the author don't know, you have no guarantee that by using a self-publisher, you are going to have a quality book at the end. You just have to do your research. You need to check online reviews, you need to talk to people, and you need to ask questions. But ultimately, self-publishing, the business model is built around the money that the author pays the publisher for services. It's not built on selling the book at all. Whereas in traditional publishing, all the money comes from selling the book. So the publisher is motivated to produce the best possible book. Self-publishing does not have that motivation. In fact, you will see on many self-publishing sites, they'll talk about how they'll brag about how they take no percentage of your sales revenue, because you get the sales revenue that you deserve. What they're really saying is, we don't care how many books you sell, because that's not what our business model is based on. And I admit there's a little bit of scorn in my voice there, but it's just, that's a little bit of me thinking back to 10 years ago when this field was full of charlatans. Thankfully, nowadays, a lot of authors are much savvier. They understand the industry much better. And self-publishing has become a lot more honest about what it actually is. There are still some self-publishing companies that just play on an author's ego and try and sell the dream of being published. But most self-publishers these days are much more honest about, nope, we can't guarantee anything. This is what we will do for you. We will give you the quality editing and cover design and web design and marketing support that you need, and you're going to pay for it. But we're here to help you, and it's your business plan. It's your financial risk, and that is the big difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing, is that the author does carry the financial risk. And some people aren't comfortable with this. Some people, it's just not an option, and that's fine. Other people, though, recognize, no, this is something I want to do. I'm going to consider it like a business plan. I'm going to put my money in up front, and if I do everything right, I can sell this many copies, and I will make my money back over this amount of time. And that's just how it is. And if you can look at it that way, that self-publishing is just sort of a business investment that you are making into something that you are passionate about, then that's a healthy way to go into this. The biggest challenge that self-publishing has as far as sales goes is that self-publishing has no access to the traditional sales channels that I talked about a few minutes ago with traditional publishing. No matter what a self-publishing company tells you, I want to make this really clear. No self-published book will actually be pitched to the buyers at Barnes & Noble. There is no sales team in a self-publishing company that will take the best of their books and will go to Barnes & Noble and will present, these are our top picks for this season. You should put them on the shelf. It just does not exist. There is no such thing. So if any self-publisher tells you that they can get your book on Barnes & Noble's shelves, they're lying. There is a kernel of truth to it, and that is this. Self-publishing companies do have access to the traditional distribution channels, which means they can list your book with Ingram or with Amazon, and they can make your book available so that your book is in the system. And if someone were to walk into a Barnes & Noble and say, I'd like to buy this book, but I can't find it on the shelf, the Barnes & Noble employee could then go to their computer and go, oh, okay, yeah, I see that I can get it through Ingram. We don't have any in Star, but I can order you one. And then they would then order it through Ingram. Ingram would print one copy and ship it using print on demand to the Barnes Noble store and they could sell it. So your book is technically available in stores, but only by special order. It will never be on shelves. So that is one of the big drawbacks of self-publishing. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you sell through traditional publishing, everybody in that sales chain takes their cut. The bookstore takes 40%, the distributor takes 15%, and the publisher keeps 90% of whatever's left. It is way better with self-publishing to just skip the traditional sales channels altogether and focus on selling online. When you look at self-publishing, there are two ways that you can approach it, and I've sort of already referred to this. One is that there are companies that will publish your book, and I have that in quotes because they sort of publish your book. They make it available is what they do. And then you can just go with author services, where you are in charge. You are the one who's actually going to publish your book yourself, and you're just hiring those services that you need. If you need an editor or a graphic designer or a web specialist, whatever. The second option is very much the DIY, the do-it-yourself, which is possible nowadays because as an author, you can use a company like Amazon or Ingram Spark to put your book directly into the distribution system and make it available for sale. 10 years ago, those didn't exist. 10 years ago, you did need a company, a self-publishing company, to do that for you. That was sort of their big lock, because they had that ability, they had that access that you as an author didn't have. And that's what they would call publishing your book, which was they would make it available. Nowadays, you actually don't even need those companies to do it. You can do it on your own. I see a comment from Haley here. Thanks, Haley. I appreciate your comments. Sorry to see you go. So when you consider self-publishing, what you want to consider is your own strengths and weaknesses. If you really, really, really have no time or inclination or ability to manage the production of your own book, a self-publishing company might be the way to go, because they will just take care of everything for you. They will just take care of everything for you, and they will show you the book when it's done, and they will hopefully pay you some of royalties that flow through them to you. But I definitely am more a fan of the second option, because the technology exists now for authors to do it mostly themselves, and most of it's pretty simple these days. So author services, I think, is a better path. Now the indie sales process, is quite different from the traditional sales process. Everything we talked about with the distributors and the sales teams and the pitching 4 months in advance, none of that exists. None of it exists, because basically you are either going to put your book up on Amazon, which you can do in a few hours, or you are going to sell the book at local events, sell it personally, and so on. The indie sales process is much more in your control. That is the great advantage you have in self-publishing, is that you can really see what's going on, and you can make changes, and you can put in your own effort. With traditional publishing, the sales process is entirely out of your control as the author. You have no part in it. You are just relying on other people to believe in your book as much as you do. In self-publishing, because you are the one in charge, you believe in your book more than anybody else, you have the advantage, and that you can use your own drive to really push it. I see some questions coming in here. Hey, from Debbie. Can you explain how Amazon or Ingram puts the book into the distribution system? Yes. Amazon has a subset. It's called Amazon KDP, Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, Amazon KDP. And Ingram, which is the biggest book distributor in America, have a separate company called Ingram Spark. Both Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark are online companies. You can just, if you just Google them, you'll find them. You can go to their website. They are specifically designed for self-published authors. And what you do is when you made an account and you've signed all the paperwork, you just upload the files, your cover file and your interior file, and you fill in the details, like the category of your book, etc., your author bio. You fill in all that information, and then that information then gets uploaded into the Amazon or Ingram databases. Those databases are exactly what the bookstores look to. If a bookstore wants to order a book, they just go to their computer and they're linked into the Amazon distribution system, and they just type in the name of the book. Oh, there it is. Yep, there's some available at the Ingram warehouse. I can order one. It'll be here in 3 days. So it basically, Amazon and Ingram both add the information for your book, the files and all of the metadata and information you put in into their distribution system, to their database. And that is now how bookstores find it. It's also how Amazon lists books online. Anything that you see for sale on Amazon is in the Amazon database with all of its product details. And through Amazon KDP or Ingram Spark, because you can sell on Amazon through Ingram Spark. You can use it for both. You just go in and you physically type in all the information, upload it, and then it becomes available. So it really is quite simple. It's quite user-friendly and quite simple. Question from Elizabeth. What is the typical financial risk in self-publishing or author services? Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, I mean, the first answer is it varies. It depends on how much you need. But for a typical book, let's say you do need to have editing. Most books do need editing. And that's not a criticism of the author at all. Every author needs an editor because there's just things that you as the author can't see. Editing will typically, for a typical size book, say a book that is up to, say, 75,000 words, which is about a 325-page book. So typical size book. Some are shorter, some are longer, but 75,000 words. Editing will cost $3,000 to $4,000. Editing is quite a labor-intensive expense, so it does cost a bit, $3,000 or $4,000. The design work, like the cover design, the interior design, making the ebook, those things typically, if your book has nothing unusual in it, like it isn't filled with pictures or it's not an art book or something like that, it's just a regular text-based book, will probably be $1,000, maybe a little less. And if you need a website, that can be anywhere from $500 to $1,000, depending on what kind of website you want. So what's that? $6,000. That's pretty typical for the financial risk as an author that you should budget. It can be less. You can certainly do it for less. And if you want to get into marketing support, it can definitely be more because marketing is a tricky one. Ideally, what you can find is not someone who will do all the marketing for you, because that is really expensive, but someone who can teach you how to do the marketing yourself. That's a really good way to approach it. That way you can put in the energy and save yourself the money. Printing is the other big variable, but if you're going to use print on demand, there's really no financial risk for printing. So if you, Elizabeth, were to think of $6,000, that's a pretty fair assessment of what you should budget for self-publishing. Christina's got a question. Between Ingram and Amazon, is there one that is better to use based on ease of use, etc.? My personal preference is for Ingram. It's Ingram Spark. I find that Spark is a little easier to use, and the benefit of Spark is that it gives you access to the entire publishing ecosystem. You can sell on Amazon through Spark, but you can also benefit from Ingram's connection to all the bookstores and the libraries and everything else. So if you want your book to be as widely available as possible, use Ingram Spark. The advantage of using just Amazon KDP is that for the first 3 months, you get benefits, you get exclusive benefits, and you get better marketing and better promotion within Amazon if you just use Amazon KDP. So often what authors will do is they will launch on Amazon KDP first, which just gives them Amazon, doesn't give them any of the bookstores, just gives them Amazon. And after those 3 months are over, then they add Ingram Spark to it, and the book becomes widely available. They're both pretty easy to use. Ingram Spark has been around for quite a few years now and is quite good. Amazon KDP has replaced what used to be Amazon CreateSpace. And CreateSpace was kind of known for being a bit cumbersome. KDP is better. They're both good. And I know a lot of authors who use both. It really depends on who you want to sell to and how you want to do it. For all of this, though, remember, though, that you are going to have to put in a lot of work. Now, that's not really a lot of different from traditional publishing, where you're still going to have to do your own marketing. That's the same in either self-publishing or traditional, but you will also have to put in the extra work to make your book available for sales. Now, here's one thing I want to talk about, which is really good for self-publishing. And that is, if you are using your book as part of your bigger business, like let's say, for example, you're a financial consultant and you want to write a book on how to save for retirement. That is a book that you could write probably very well because you're an expert in the field and you have a lot of credibility to sell that book because of your designation. But you might want to use that book almost like a giant calling card, where you might even give the book away for free to people. And because they like your book so much, they will then come to you and sign you as a financial consultant. And lots of people, professionals, do this. You know, doctors can do it. Lots of professionals who have a service-based business, they actually use their book almost like a promotional tool. They might sell it, they might give it away for free. Often, if you are giving a talk on your subject matter expertise, you can then have a table at the back of the room where you are selling your book. And that's a very good way to sell. Self-publishing was made for authors like that. It is perfect for them. Authors like that do not want to traditionally publish, because if you traditionally publish, you cannot sell your book on your own. You are not allowed to sell your book. It has to go through the publisher. So let's say you're a specialist and you're giving a talk to 200 people, and you want to have a little bookstore at the back to sell your book. If you're traditionally published, you need to arrange that months in advance with your publisher, who have to agree to it, and they probably will, but you still have to get their agreement. You then have to talk to the distributor, you then have to get the book to the place where you're doing it, and there has to be a local bookstore who is willing to be the seller of your book. And everybody takes their cut. You know, I get 40% to the bookstore, 15% to the distributor, and the publisher keeps 90% of what's left. You are basically not getting anything. But if you were self-published, you just set up at the back. It could be you, it could be your friend sitting at the table with a square right out of your phone. You can process credit cards right there, and you can keep 100% of the sales. So for people who are using their book as some kind of addition to their existing business, and there are actually a lot of authors out there who do that, self-publishing is by far the better option for them. So I just wanted to focus on that. That is one of the really good things about the self-publishing sales process, is that you do have complete control and you don't need to get anybody else's permission to do these things. But it does require a lot of work. So in general, this is sort of a comment about marketing, but this is particularly geared towards the self-publishing, is that the challenge you have is rising above the crowd. It is possible as a self-published author to get your book into local bookstores, like in your hometown. Most bookstores are pretty good about taking self-published books if they are of suitable quality, and because they know that you're local, they know that you will send people to the bookstore to buy the book. The problem is there's just so many books, and they can't always take it, and they may take it for a month and then say, sorry, we just haven't sold any, we're giving them back to you. And online bookstores, now there's no limit to shelf space on Amazon, but there are millions of books available, with more coming every day. And Amazon does not have a particularly good browsing function. If you are looking for something specific on Amazon, you can find it really easily. But if you're just looking for your next book, like, what should I do? Like you would do in a bookstore, where you would just wander in, you would find the shelf of books that you want to read, and you would look at the covers and you would find something. It's very hard to do that effectively on Amazon, unless you just want to look at bestsellers, right? So if what are the top 100 best-selling books in this genre, then you can find them. But for you as an author who's just getting started, well, you're not one of the top selling ones yet. You need to find other ways. And that is the challenge of selling in self-publishing, is just rising above the crowd and making yourself available. And there are certainly some tricks to improving your chances on Amazon. And it generally comes down to marketing and raising awareness. And the problem is you don't have a traditional publisher backing you up who might be able to get you into, bigger publications, that sort of thing. So this is the challenge. It's the challenge for both traditional and self-publishing, but it's particularly so for self-publishing. Okay, so before I get onto a comparison, are there any questions about self-publishing? Okay, well, what I want to do now is just wrap up with, oh, here's a question coming in on chat. Let's see. What are the tricks on Amazon? Well, Debbie, that's a big question. It's not something I can really answer right now. And frankly, I am not a marketing expert, so I wouldn't be the best person to ask anyway. But there are folks out there who specialize in book marketing who will probably know. And even the word tricks, I know I'm the one who used that word. It's not the best word to use because there's nothing underhanded about what I'm talking about. It is, it's just understanding how Amazon works and using, you're making sure you have the right keywords, making sure you've chosen the right categories to put your book in, that sort of thing. That unfortunately is a big question, which I can't really answer here, but there are lots of people out there who can probably answer that for you. Question from Robert. Yeah, so 3,000 to 4,000 for editing, 1,000 is for design. So for your cover design, for your interior design, and for your ebook production. Those things all fall under a design work. And yeah, about $1,000 is probably what you'd need to get that done quality. Question from Krista about hybrid publishing. Yes. Can you get the best of both worlds? Yes, short answer. You can if you have the right hybrid publisher, and there are certainly some good ones out there. In fact, let me just make an endorsement right now. There's one, it's called BQB Publishing. They're based on the East Coast. They're a reputable company. I've met the publisher. I've seen their books. They are the real deal. There's another one called She Writes Press. It's for female authors. And it's based in California. Another legitimate, they were a real leader in hybrid publishing. They were one of the first ones to really get out there and make a stink about it. Hybrid publishing can be good in that you will probably get a greater percentage of the revenue back. You won't get just your 10%, you'll get a higher revenue because you've made an investment. You will also probably have a little bit more control, and you'll be more of a partner than just, an author, which in the traditional world, it's funny, authors seem to be the lowest member of the food chain, even though without us, the industry wouldn't exist. But with hybrid publishing, it'll be a smaller company and you will have a bit more say. And hybrid publishing will ideally give you the advantages of traditional publishing in that they have expertise, they have connections to the review world, and they have access to the traditional sales channels. So your book does stand a chance of actually making it onto shelves. They will also just bring general expertise with marketing and online selling too. So ideally, hybrid publishing is actually a good option. It's just a matter of finding the right one, because there are some companies out there who call themselves hybrid, but they're really just self-publishing. So again, it's a matter of educating yourself to make sure you know what questions to ask. And if they can't answer them correctly, then walk away, find someone else. Question from Karen. Do your estimated costs include the cost of copywriting and several ISBNs? You don't need to pay anything to copyright your book. You actually don't need to register your book as a copyright. The rules for publishing are that as soon as you have written the words, they are automatically copyrighted. So there's no need for you to go through a process of registering your book with the, with the patent office or with copywriting or anything like that. So there's no costs there. My estimated cost did not include ISBNs. Fair point. There is a cost there. $100, maybe a couple of $100, depending on how many you want to buy. If you work with an author services company, you can sometimes, they'll take care of that for you. That's just something to talk about with them. And it also depends on what country you're in. In Canada, ISBNs are free. You don't have to pay anything for them. In the United States, you do have to pay. In the UK, I think you have to pay, but it depends. So whichever country you are in, make sure you check what your rules are. But yeah, definitely in the US, you do have to pay. And it is hundreds of dollars to get that. Generally, they recommend that you order a bulk. Like, you don't just buy one, buy a group of 10, because it's much more cost effective. And remember too that you will want a different ISBN for each format of your book. So your paperback needs an ISBN, your ebook needs a separate ISBN. So you're probably going to need at least 2. If you ever do a hardcover, you need another ISBN. An audio book needs another ISBN. You cannot use the same ISBN for different formats. So, you'll definitely need at least 2, because I always recommend doing an ebook, and you may conceivably need 3 or 4. And if you buy a block of 10, well, then you're set for your second, maybe third book too. Okay, question from Krista. If your book falls outside of typical categories or norms, what is the best route? Security of traditional, or freedom of self-publishing, or hybrid? I do know that hybrid, just as sort of the nature of the industry, hybrid are often more willing to cross genres and to straddle categories. Because everything about hybrid is kind of doing that already. You may find a more sympathetic or more welcoming audience with hybrid. But otherwise, if you're interested in traditional publishing, then I would definitely recommend try it. Try it first. Understanding all the other limitations of traditional publishing, if you're just worried about something that's crossing categories, you'd be surprised at how flexible editors and agents can actually be. Really, what they are interested in is, will this book sell? If it crosses genres, they're okay with that. They'll make it work. It's, will it sell? Longer books, if it's a really long book, that can be a challenge for traditional publishing, yes. It depends on what genre you're writing in. Like fantasy, for example, generally allows for longer books, but other, like romance, generally want shorter books. So you have to know what the norms in your industry are. Writing a longer book, yes, can definitely be a red flag for traditional publishing, just because it costs so much to produce it. And they have to price it a little higher. So are people going to buy it? Are they going to commit to a big, thick brick of a book by an author they've never met? It doesn't mean it's a showstopper, but it is definitely a consideration. And obviously with self-publishing, there's no worry about that. Okay, from Debbie, do I know the quality of hybrid publisher for children's picture books? Generally very high. Hybrid publishers generally have the same standard of production as a traditional publisher. Now, of course, you can always query them, and they should be able to give you examples, but generally it's high. Yeah, that's one thing about hybrid publishers, the quality is high. I'm never really worried too much about that. It's just how much are they asking you to contribute, and how good is their sales process? That's the big questions I usually have with hybrid publishing. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just going to go through my comparison here, and there'll still be more time for questions at the end. This is just a summary of what we've talked about with a few extra ideas. And I just want to reiterate here that I am not trying to convince anyone to go one way or the other. Traditional and self-publishing are both great paths with their pros and cons, and my purpose here is just to try and make sure you have your eyes wide open when you go in. So here are some points to consider between traditional and self-publishing. Traditional, you as the author don't pay anything, and that's great. In self-publishing, you pay for everything, and that's just a consideration, and that may very well stop you from considering self-publishing if you're just not in a position to spend the money. And that's fair. That's totally fair. Maybe you have the money, you just don't want to spend it. That's totally fair too. But that's just something that's the biggest thing right there, is who pays. The reverse of that, though, is who gets paid. In traditional publishing, you don't put any money in, but you will get very little money out. That's just the way it is. You get 10% of what the publisher gets. And if you get an advance, you don't even get royalties until that advance has paid out. So like if you get a $5,000 advance, until the book has sold enough copies that would have given you $5,000 in royalties, you don't see any more money. It's only when the book has sold enough copies that it has paid you more than that advance on royalties we actually start to pay royalties or see royalties. My agent told me years ago, most books never pay out their advances. So he said that as an agent, his job was to get me the biggest advance possible, because that's probably the only money I'm ever going to see for that book. So that's a good thing to know. Next point is the timelines. As we've talked about, because of the sales process, the traditional publishing has very long timelines. Self-publishing can have very short timelines. So if you have a book that you need to get out quickly, self-publishing is the only way to go. If you have a very topical book, like for example, I know at Cascadia, they've been dealing with a couple of authors who have books to do with COVID. Well, they need to get out now. You know, they're not good 2 years from now, which is what traditional publishing would need. You need to get out now. So that is something to think about, is the timelines. Self-publishing can be much faster. When it comes to rights, we haven't really talked about this a lot, but let me just talk about it briefly. If you sign a traditional publishing deal, what that is technically called in the industry is a rights sale. And that means that you have sold the rights to your book to the publisher. And the rights, there are all kinds of rights. I mean, the biggest, most important ones are the right to sell the book in paperback, hardcover, audiobook, ebook form. And those aren't always together. You can actually separate them out. There's also the rights to selling it in different territories. You may sell the right to sell the book in North America, but not the rest of the world, right? That is legitimate. Then there's movie adaptation rights, the serialization rights. There's all kinds of rights, and your agent will know all about this. But if you sign a traditional deal, the point is, at the very least, you have sold the right to sell your book, which means you cannot sell your book now. You cannot do it. You are breaking your contract if you do that. The publisher now has the exclusive ability to sell your book. And they may have other rights too. So you just have to be careful and read the contract. With self-publishing, that's not the case. You retain all your rights. And again, with self-publishing, be very careful. There are a few old self-publishing companies out there that do try and take your rights. Don't ever give a self-publishing company your rights. They don't deserve your rights. You keep the rights to your book. But that is something that's important to some authors. With hybrid publishing, it's usually somewhere in between. Usually with hybrid publishing, they will buy certain rights that are very well defined, and they will buy them for a certain period of time, like maybe 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, at which point those rights revert to you. Hybrid usually takes that path. Regarding creative control, traditional, the publisher has full creative control. The publisher decides what the cover is. The publisher decides what font to use, how to lay out the book. They can change the title. That's all up to them now. The words themselves are still yours, but the way the book is packaged is the publisher's. Some authors have a real problem with that. I know when I ran Promontory, I learned pretty early on that some authors are really, really hard to work with. And I actually developed a little test that when I was talking to an author and we were genuinely interested in signing them for a book, and we know that, and I'm discussing it with them, and I would want to get on the phone with them to talk to this person to get a sense of who they are, because we're going to be working with this person for the next few years. And I would do this little test, and I would say to them, I really like your book. I think it's going to go far, but I'm not sure about the title. I think we're going to change the title. And I would see how they reacted. And if the author reacted with something like, oh, okay, well, I mean, you know best, so sure, I'll consider that. Great. But I had authors respond with, no way, no way, no, I have worked on that title. That title is everything. I am not changing that title. That is a huge red flag to me as a publisher, because that suggests that if the author is not willing to even discuss the title, how much trouble are we going to have with them with the editing of the book? So it sort of became a really good litmus test for me as a publisher to figure out how good was the author at giving up creative control, or at least sharing it. So that's something that you want to take a good look at yourself and realize, are you okay with someone else designing your cover and designing what your book looks like? Or are you going to have a real problem with that? And it's fine. It's totally fine, because your book is your passion, and we're all artists. And so we have really strong feelings about this stuff. If you feel that you really do want to keep creative control, then self-publishing might be the better path for you. So something to consider. And one last page of things to consider. With traditional publishing, your book will be eligible for all major awards that it can be submitted for. Self-publishing, not so much. This is slowly changing, and I've seen this happen over the last 10 years of the legitimacy of self-publishing has been getting better and better. And this will continue to evolve. There are more and more awards now that will accept self-published books. There are still some that won't. Okay, whatever, that's their choice. But there are more and more that will. So that just sort of comes back to the whole topic of legitimacy. If that is a big deal to you about are you a legitimate author, and I say that with quotes, then traditional publishing might be the way you want to go. If it's something that doesn't fuss you as much, or you want to be part of the revolution, then self-publishing might be the way to go. But it's still a thing. It's not as big a thing as it used to be, but it is still there. All right, so here are some chat questions. Okay, first one from Molly. Not sure how this question fits, but I've been advised that my nonfiction book would only be accepted by traditional publishers if I cited published books only, not articles or medical websites, meaning that self-publishing would be the only option. I don't know, Molly. I'm not sure that I would believe that. I think that traditional publishers, they run the whole gamut of what their opinion of the rest of the industry is. Some traditional publishers will certainly accept articles or medical websites as long as they're legitimate. And again, this is something which has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years as the internet has changed. Yeah, there's a lot on the internet that is silly and it is not well researched and is not valid, but there's also a lot that is valid. And it's really just a matter of understanding which is which. And yeah, I can see how some traditional publishers would be really snooty about that, and they just know it has to come from another book. Fair enough. But I mean, I know that academics doesn't even work that way. Academics will cite from articles and journals and websites even. So I'm not sure that's entirely true. It might be, and I don't know the honest answer. I think it could be that some publishers feel that way, others don't. I would recommend, if you want to go traditional publishing, give it a try and just see what comes back. Self-publishing is always an option for you. Like it never goes away. That option is never stale. So I would recommend trying a traditional publishing pitch and see what you get back. And if it just doesn't work out, self-publishing is always there for you. Dan is asking, do you have any tips for establishing a strong collaborative relationship with an editor, particularly in self or hybrid publishing? Yes, whenever you're going to talk to an editor, you definitely want to interview the editor. Ideally, if you can get on the phone with them, or Zoom is even better, because then you can see each other's faces. Just get a sense of who they are. You definitely want to see a sample of their editing beforehand, just to get a sense of what they will do. And for establishing a strong collaborative relationship, you want to find an editor, ideally, who works in the genre of writing that you work in, so that you share that passion. And they will also bring experience of what they've seen before. And ultimately, it comes down to respect. I know as an author, I often don't like what my editor is telling me. And so it's a matter of how do I respond to my editor. Remember that your editor is a pro, and their job is to make your writing more clear and more effective. And sometimes you don't like what they have to say. So that's fine. You can disagree with your editor. Ultimately, you're the author, you're in charge. And that's even true with a traditional editor. I remember I had a big argument with my editor at Titan with my very first book about the use of metric, because I was writing in the future and I was using metric terms. And my editor, who was really old school, said, nope, the American audience won't understand metric. You have to use imperial. And I kind of disagreed with that. I said, well, NASA uses metric. Star Trek uses metric. I'm pretty sure we can get away with this. And it got really quite heated. And I actually had to talk to my agent and say, how much control do I have here as the author? Because I don't agree with what he's doing. My agent reassured me, nope, When it comes to the words, you are in charge. And if you need me to get involved, I will. And my agent's great, by the way. The editors in New York are afraid of him. But you ideally don't want to argue with your editor. You can disagree, and you can work through it. And okay, why is your editor saying this? Okay, I see your point. I don't agree with your recommendation, but I see your point. Maybe this. And that's the way that you can work on it together, I think. From a question here, what is a backlist? Yeah, the backlist is basically all of the books that a publisher has put out that are not from this month. The front list is the opposite, and those are the new books. The books that are just coming out, are just about to come out. They're the ones the publisher is talking about, the front list. But as soon as your book is published and it's now a month old, it's basically on the backlist, which means the publisher is not going to put any further promotional effort into it. That's the backlist. And so most books are on the backlist, and they're only not on the backlist for a very short amount of time. My books, generally, I find I have my publisher's marketing team's attention for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks before launch, then that's it. They've forgotten about it, and the book is dead to them because they've moved on to next month's books, and that's it. So that's the backlist. Yeah, and that's to do with the point here that I'm making about the trade market. Yeah, your book in traditional publishing, you have one shot to sell your book. And however that goes, your book then goes on the backlist, and your publisher will never give it any more effort. Whereas with self-publishing, you have technically no shot at the traditional market because your book will never be pitched to the bookstore buyers, but it never goes on a backlist because online, your book is always current. Your book is on the front list when someone finds it. They go, oh, what's this book? I've never seen this before. It is now technically on the front list. So that's the difference between the sales process and traditional and sales. Okay, question from Roy. How can I get a variety of feedback on my draft manuscript? I'm wanting to identify potential and maximize impact. Thanks. Yep. One thing you can do is have a group of beta readers. So people that you trust and that you respect their opinion, you can give them the manuscript to read. Ideally, they are people that are in your target audience. So people either, if it's a nonfiction book, they are the people who the problem that you're solving is directed towards them. Or if it's a fiction book, just people who like that genre. They should not be family members because family members probably won't give honest criticism, or if they do, you won't appreciate it. Trust me, I've learned that one. They can be friends, but ideally they're sort of pushed back, like friends of friends are often the best place to do it. That's the best way to start is with beta readers. The next way is there are some editing services that offer like a manuscript evaluation. So it's much, much cheaper than an edit, but they will read the whole book and they will give you like a 10-page report on what your book is. So that's a great way to, for a small amount of money, to get some professional feedback that can help you go. From Sherry, I've written a children's book and I'm considering self-publishing. What are the options for illustrations? I'm not an artist. Yeah. If you're going to self-publish a children's book, then you do need to find your own artist. And the best way to do that is you can certainly talk to any of the self-publishing companies or author services companies. They may have illustrators in-house that you can hire, or just start Googling book illustrators for hire, like simple as that. And there are lots and lots of artists out there who will do work like this. And they will no doubt have up on their website examples of their work, and you can look for an artist whose style you think best fits your book and then contact them. I'm going to give you a heads up right now, Sherry, that illustrations are generally not cheap, but you want to get the best illustrations. For a children's book, it's all about the illustrations. If you go traditional publishing, just as an aside, you do not need to get yourself an artist. Your publisher will provide the artist. And in fact, they don't want you to get an artist. They will have their own artist. And the funny thing is, if you traditionally publish, you as the author and the artist will probably never speak. It's weird. It's a really weird thing, but you will just see the pictures and you will never get a chance to talk to the artist. So one of those things. Okay. Last point about the considerations between traditional and self-publishing and traditional is your access to stores. With traditional publishing, you do have full access to stores, with the caveats that I've explained, that your book may not stay there, but you have no ability to sell the book privately. With self-publishing, you have little to no access to stores, but you do have the ability to sell privately. In both cases, your book will be available online. It's a matter of how much control do you have. This is something with the access to stores. It's something that you, again, as an author, need to think about and be honest with yourself. Is this important to you? Is this valuable to you? Does your book need this? I know that most of us are of an age where we remember the bookstores, and that's where we always went, and we didn't buy online. We always go to bookstores, and we still love going to bookstores. I certainly do. And if you want to see your book on the shelf, if that's really important to you, then, you know, do keep that in mind. But quite honestly, if you're interested in making your book a success and selling, online selling is how you're going to do most of it anyway. No matter which way you publish, online selling is a huge part of it. So it's a matter of what would best serve your book as to the access to stores. Question from Susan. What are the general costs for hybrid, and what are the author's responsibilities? Yeah, this does vary a lot. I know from hybrid contracts I have seen in the past, the investment from an author was $5,000, which is about a third of the cost, by the way, of what it takes to take a book to market, not including the marketing costs. One that I saw just recently, actually, a friend of mine who's an author is considering a hybrid deal, and she asked me to take a look at her contract. It was a little less. It was anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000, depending on what options she wanted to choose. That's a good ballpark for the cost of hybrid. And the author's responsibilities are to work well with the editor. That's a big responsibility. And there'll probably be some marketing responsibilities as well. It's quite similar to traditional publishing in that sense, in that the publisher will take care of most of it. You as the author will have input into the cover design, etc., but most of the heavy lifting is done by the publisher if they're a true hybrid. So something to think about. Okay, great.
Ben, can I just insert, some people are sending your questions to me. I'm Sean, but it's coming up as my name is Randy. If you'd send them directly to Ben, because we're running out of time, I'd hate to not have you get your question to him on time.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, from Kate. With traditional publishing, does the author only do marketing for 6 weeks before launch? What other things can I do for longevity? No, you as the author can do as much marketing as you want. Your publisher will do it 6 weeks before launch. And so you can pretty much ride on that. After launch, though, it's entirely up to you. And I personally would recommend that you keep doing marketing continuously, just to keep your presence going, to build your following, to get that going. So I would make it just a regular part of your weekly routine, is to do some kind of social media or outreach or something after launch. So yes, as the author, you definitely can. From Kathy, on Children's Book Illustrator, are they paid up front and then have no percentage of sales? Yeah, generally illustrators are paid up front and they have no commitment to the book. They are generally like any other service you will buy, like editing or cover design or anything else. They are providing you a service, and then you then own those illustrations and you put them in your book. You will occasionally find illustrators who are willing to work for a percentage of book sales, but it's pretty rare. It is pretty rare. Most of the time, illustrators want to get paid like any other service provider. Yeah, question. So, in summary, just before we get to the last bit for time for questions, this is an exciting time to be an author because you do have a lot of options. The traditional industry is still valid, it's still strong, it's still big, and it's still a good option if you want to take it. But whereas it used to be the only option, now you have other choices. And self-publishing can be a very good solution for authors, depending on who they are and what they want to accomplish. So I encourage everyone to give it some serious thought as to whether traditional or self-publishing is the best option for you and the best option for your book. A question from Sherry, what is the lead time for hybrid publishing? It's pretty similar to traditional because they have to go through the same sales process as the traditional publishers. If they don't, and this is one of the big things you can ask a hybrid publisher, is how quickly will your book be published? If they tell you something like, oh, 6 months after we sign with you, then you know that they are not doing the traditional sales process, that they are really just a self-publisher at that point. If they tell you it's going to be 18 months and they explain to you because of the sales process, well, then you know. That's actually a really good question to ask a hybrid publisher, to give you a sense of just how close to traditional are they versus how close to self-publishing are they. That's a key question to ask them, Sherry. So that is the end of my presentation. I've just put up the website here. If anyone wants to learn more about the services that Cascadia offers, I encourage you to check out cascadiaauthorservices.com. But I promise that is the extreme limit of self-promotion that I'm doing on this presentation. My purpose today really is just to give information and to help authors go into this industry with their eyes wide open. The question from Dina: how do I go about finding an agent? There used to be books that were published by like Writer's Digest, the Science Fiction Writers Association, SIFWA, sometimes things like writers associations like Chicago Writers Association may have lists. But honestly, these days, like most other things, it's Google. If you can Google literary agents and then put in your genre, that will probably lead you to websites that list agents. And very often agents will show up. They'll show up on a list and it'll give you some basic information of who they are, how to contact them, and what they are looking for. And that'll give you a nice list to start with. If at that point you want to start narrowing it down, you can go to the agent's websites and they will tell you exactly what they are looking for and what they are not looking for. And they will also tell you exactly how to submit to them. Like they want a query letter, no more than 1 page. They want a synopsis, no more than 2 pages. They want the first 50 pages of your writing, like something like that. Every agent is different, and every way that they ask for things is going to be different. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, just because I want to see everybody's faces again, and I can see the chat a little more easily too. I hope that's been useful for everyone. I haven't quite got the kill sign from Sean yet, and we're out of time, but I think we're getting pretty close. Are there any last questions? And feel free to unmute and ask me vocally if you want, or type in the chat. Either's good.
That's it?
No, I had a question yet.
Sure, Lois, yeah.
My book was self-published and I just got the rights back. I mean, not hybrid published. Not self, it was hybrid published, and I just got the rights back and a PDF. What do I need to do to get it on Amazon as a POD?
Yeah, you want to go to Amazon KDP or to Ingram Spark, either one. They're both online services, and you just sign up and you should be able to upload the PDF of the interior of your book, and you'll need a cover file as well. You may want to design a new cover at this point if you want to, but you'll need those 2 things: the interior of the book and the cover file. And in PDF, and I think that might be JPEG for the cover, I'm not sure, but they will tell you exactly what they need.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. You see from Krista, how important is an agent generally and specifically for self or hybrid publishing? Not at all. If you are going to self-publish or hybrid publish, you do not need an agent. And in fact, an agent would probably not be interested in dealing with you. Agents are very much and wholly part of the traditional publishing world. That is where they live. So you just don't need them otherwise. Great. Any other questions?
One last question, anybody?
From Molly. Do author services typically include helping with submission queries or researching similar books? Sometimes, yes. I know at Cascadia, they have a whole section for traditional authors, and writing queries and synopsis is definitely part of that. Researching similar books, yes. It's a bit of an unusual one, but I think most author services can help with that. They'd probably have to do a specialized quote for you because just it's about how much time is needed for that. But yes, that sort of thing is what author services could help you with for sure.
Okay, let's call it there. I think, you know, I've been in the business as an author for quite a while, and I've never seen the entire industry broken down so thoroughly, Ben. And having you here has really helped in the Chicago Writers Association in our attempt to create a community. It's nice to see all these authors' faces, and we'll continue to do that. Can we all unmute for a second and just give Ben a hand? Right. And
There
thank
we
you.
go. Finally.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Christina, for helping.
Thank you.
All right. We'll call Ben.
Good job.
I don't know if that's how they say it in Canada. In the US, good job. My wife from England, and she always makes fun of us. They say, well done. So either way you take it.
That's very, very posh. You say, good job, eh? That's about all we need.
All right. All right. Well, goodbye, everyone. Thank you for coming, and please
Thank
come
you.
to our future events.
Thank you. Great job, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thank
day.
you, Ben.